Hey everyone, it's time for another Tyranid Tactica video. This one here is going to be list building basics in regards to 7th edition. So now that it's been out for a while and I've had quite a bit of play experience in 7th edition, I'm sure everyone else has too. So we're going to take a look at the list building basics you need to consider when making a Tyranid list. This video is going to be a lot similar to our first one from 6th edition rules. But there's quite a few changes, so we are going to keep those in mind, and hopefully they'll help any new players to Tyranids make some considerations when deciding what units to buy or what units to bring in their lists. So first off, I am going to note that when considering making a list, if you know if you're playing Maelstrom or not, that can hugely influence what you're going to bring to your list. But we're going to go into this without knowing if we're playing Maelstrom or Eternal War or Altar of War or whatever other mission pack that you have out there. So keeping that in mind, we're going to talk about what units would be good all-rounders as well. So taking a look at the HQ section first, I got all the HQ choices here except Death Leaper and a Walking Tyrant. I do have a Death Leaper and a Walking Tyrant in the works who will be magnetized into a Flyrant if I need it. But anyway, those two options. Death Leaper, he's pretty good. Just to bring him alone, a couple of the other HQ choices here kind of outclass him. So in regards to who's better, Death Leaper generally loses that battle. And also there's Old One-Eye, in case anyone's going to nitpick at me for not mentioning him, but he's pretty garbage, so we're going to ignore him. So the Tyranid Prime, he's pretty trash. He hasn't changed much into 7th edition. There hasn't been any major rule changes that all of a sudden make him outstanding. Actually, a couple rule changes made him worse, where independent characters can't actually join monstrous creatures now. So you could stick him with a unit of Fexes before and just charge up the table and have your Warlord kind of really hard to dig out, but now you can't really do that. He can still go in a unit of Gaunts, but if your opponent has a lot of templates, flamers, they can easily take care of that unit. So he's kind of out of the picture for like go-to HQs. We'll quickly talk about the Flyrant. Reason I say quickly is because obviously with Twin Link Devours and Wings, this guy is unstoppable. Well, not unstoppable, but like he's a monster on the table, so he's pretty crazy. Like it's with the new rules where he only takes one grounding test if he's wounded, I find my Flyrant's survivability is pretty much doubled, and they're pretty crazy. One thing we will talk about too, just since it's just come up because I'm on the Flyrant. If you think you're going to be playing a lot of vehicles too, you got to kind of consider electroshock grubs where they're haywire. Because the big change in 7th is that vehicles no longer just blow up on a roll of a 6. It actually has to be a 7. So we don't have a lot of AP weapons. We only actually have 2 shooting weapons that have AP 2. One of them's a psychic ability too, so which is not that reliable. So you got to kind of consider, like, am I going to be playing a lot of vehicles if I'm going against Garden? I know my opponent brings a lot of vehicles, or even Space Marines. You got to kind of consider that he's quick. He can get up the table fast, and he can use E-grubs to take out vehicles, or at least wound them and help the other Tyranids on the table peel them apart. So you kind of got to consider that as well when building your list. But I thought I'd highlight that since we were at the Flyer. Next to talk about is the Swarm Lord. He is a little overpriced for what he does now. He's still a beast in close combat, but lost a lot of his ability from the previous codex, but he's still got his role as a buffer on the table. He fits more in friendly kind of fluffy matches, but he's still fun to use, and you can get away with using him. The kind of list you want to build around him is more, well, I find having even not so much swarm armies, but he can toss out a furious charge to say Hormagaunts or something, and they can help them kill vehicles. So he kind of has his role, but it's hard for him to really fit in because he takes up so much points, and you need to bring guard with him just to have him alive on the table. So another option for HQ is the Turbogon. I had him over in troops before, I believe, in the last video, kind of when I talked about him, because he can be still taken as a troops option, but with the new rules and everything, I find he kind of fits better over here. being that he has that huge gaunt tax, and well, if you're not going full competitive and bringing the 2 Flyrants, I find the Tervigon is always my go-to choice as my secondary HQ, just because he can pump out gaunts. I find Crushing Claws are huge on him too, being that it gets Armor Bane and it's AP 2. Well, obviously it's AP 2 because monster creature, but anyway, and it helps take out vehicles a lot easier because he's only strength 5 and gets +1 strength. And E-grubs are always a must on him, at least in my opinion, when I've used Tervigon. So that's kind of the HQ department, and those are some things you got to think about when choosing your HQ. For beginners, in my opinion, I'd recommend at least 1 Flyrant and a Tervigon to go with. If you're going to be rolling with 2 HQ choices, you can always go with 2 Flyrants. Like I have my second one over there, and I have a third one kind of in the works, but I have other units that I'm wanting to finish first, such as my Shrikes and my Death Leaper. But anyway, that's the HQ section. So moving on, we got the Elites choices. So one huge change from my previous video is I now have a Venomthrope and have a lot of play experience with them. And when looking at the Elite section, you kind of got to think about, do I need that extra bit of Synapse? I need some more Psychic Dice. Am I trying to get Catalyst or anything like that? So, reason I mentioned that is that's with the Zoanthrope, he kind of has his role there. With this changes to Psychic powers, it's a lot harder to use them. I found in 6th edition, I was able to pop like a tank a turn with them. I rolled really good with them. And I usually had a Brood of 3. So they could, at least pop a tank a turn in 6th edition. But now where it's actually a little bit harder to blow up a tank, and it's actually a lot harder to get Psychic powers off too, because you got to roll for your powers. Good chance you might peril too, because Warp Lance is a Warp Charge 2 power, so it's kind of hard to get it off. So they're definitely not as reliable as they used to be. But if you need that bonus to Synapse, they're a cheap little option just to stick them in there. And if you get lucky, you might get Catalyst, or you get another buffing power like Onslaught to help you guys up the table, or even Proxim. I really like Proxim. You can also pod them in now too. I did say we wouldn't really talk about other options, but that's from the Shield of Bale supplement that added in Tyrannocytes, which are Tyranid drop pods. You can put them in. There's also the Neurothrope, but I'll go over all those units once I get a hold of them. As I mentioned, we're just going to stick to the base codex. Then you got to think about the Hive Guard. I usually include them in a lot of my list, being that Tyranids don't have a lot of options to pop armor now, with the changes to how the vehicle damage chart works, and also too, ignoring line of sight, these guys are pretty solid on the table. And other than that, not much has changed going into 7th with them. I include them in most of my list, but the real star of the Elite section is the Venomthrope. This guy pumps up shrouding to anyone who's within 6 inches of him, and obviously the shrouding rule is if one model in the unit has shrouding, the whole unit has it. So I generally include 2 guys in a lot of my lists, and the third Elite slot's usually either a Hive Guard or a Brood of Zoanthropes if I want more Synapse. But these guys are cheap. They can give up first blood easily if your opponent has a bit of ignore cover, but for the most part, by the end of turn 2, they've done their job and kept the important models in cover and kept them alive. So my recommendation when building a list is definitely consider a Venomthrope. You should probably at least take 1, and Hive Guard, I strongly recommend them as well. Zoanthrope's kind of up in the air. There's mixed thoughts about them. They work sometimes, they don't sometimes, but I still enjoy them. I'm a big fan of the old model. The new model's cool, but I like the old one a lot. And I have 5 of them, so they work and they don't. It's kind of gotta roll with what you like and do a little bit of your own personal play testing. And I will note too, meta is different everywhere, and everyone's local meta just varies. Some people get away with using some things, like I've seen people swear against Tervigon, say how terrible they are, and they just don't work for them. I've had good luck with them, but our meta isn't crazy competitive. It can be at times if we agree to a more serious game, but you gotta go with what works for you. But I just kind of want to give people ideas of what works. Other Elite's choices are Lictors. I don't have any Lictors yet. I really want to get some. I haven't used them myself, so I can't give a lot of details on what works with lictors. They recently won LVO, which is a huge tournament on the West Coast. It was a lictor spam list. The idea behind that is having a minimum size units, just to kind of steal objectives, because lictors don't scatter, and then they can just hide away on objectives, and if your opponent shoots at them, he's not shooting at your flyrant. So that's a quick idea behind lictors and how they work. Just taking a lone lictor probably won't do much on the table, so unless you're running like a full lictor spam, or at least have a couple of them and say maybe Death Leaper just for fun, you can kind of go at it with that. But taking a single lictor, I would just say no and take a Venom Thrope. It's probably a much better idea if you're just building a basic 1500 or 1750 or whatever point list. So that's the Elite and HQs covered. Oh, and if you have any questions to me, or if you have any comments that you want to add just on things I missed, or any other tips you can give newer players, toss them in the comments section. Looking at troops now. So our troops options, we actually have quite a few choices to go with here. The first thing I'm going to talk about, though, when building a list, between Termagants and Hormagaunts. I know I did that backwards when I grabbed them. If you're going to go with Hormagaunts, my recommendation is, and this is my personal opinion on it, is you got to go all in on Hormagaunts or all in on Termagants. The reason is, when you mix them, there's just not enough Hormagaunts to really make an impact, and usually the first wave just kind of dies, and if you make them all poison, it's quite a bit of points just going down the tube for units that might not make it to combat. So you either want to go all in on one or the other. With Termagants now, Devours are still a really good option. As mentioned before, we do have that drop pod if you're playing with that, or if you have the model, which can drop them in like we used to in 5th edition. They can get rear shots and vehicles, and even on their own they still kind of work with the screen of, say, gargoyles. Or even outflanking them using the Hive Commander from the Hive Tyrant. I've done that a couple times and had some success, but it is risky though, so there's times where they won't come in and you're left with a pretty expensive unit just sitting there doing nothing, or miss an opportunity to shoot something. So that's with Termagants. Sometimes I just take 10 Termagants just to have them scuttle around, but the thing now is Rippers are scoring in 7th edition, which is huge. Swarms are now scoring, there's nothing against them. So if you're looking just to fill a troop slot cheaply, but also still have a unit that can take objectives or deep strike in and just steal an objective, and their profile is tiny if you just look at them. Like, they're not very high when compared to other models. So they can hide behind terrain rather easily. So if you take Rippers, they can steal objectives, and they fill up our troops slot rather nicely, instead of taking 10 Termagants who can die pretty quick. And the nice thing about these guys is they're auto synapse, they won't run, which Termagants do. So with Termagants versus Rippers, Rippers are definitely got the edge on them. But if you're going to go with a lot of Termagants, take Devours or go all in and take a bunch of them, just kind of overwhelm your opponent. And with Hormagaunts, I'll quickly go over them again. If you're going to take Hormagaunts, I recommend you either go with Adrenal Glands or Poison on the group. Taking both gets kind of expensive. I'd say Poison might be the better option, but if you know you're against a lot of armor, but you're bringing Hormagaunts anyway, Adrenal Glands obviously is a better choice because you can glance rear armor. So that's really all I got for them. Gene Stealers, they're still hard to use. You can work rather well with Gene Stealers by doing Gene Stealer spam. That's just, and minimum size units with them. So it's just so many models there and such small units that you kind of overwhelm your opponent, and generally they won't have enough shooting to take all of them out. Or if they're shooting at the Gene Stealers with everything, then your important guys like Flyrants and Hive Guard or Carnifexes or whatever else you got running up the table will get ignored, which is good. The other unit that I run a lot with troops is Warriors. Prime reason being that they have Synapse, and they're good backfield objective babysitters. If you stick a Barbed Strangler on them, you can kind of just sit back, toss out a bunch of templates, and they have a lot of wounds too, so they can kind of stay alive and cover near a Venom Thrope, and I usually keep them by my Biowars or Exocrine or whatever I got sitting near the mid backfield. So Warriors are definitely a good choice. So my recommendation for new players, if you want to get a good base for troop choices, definitely at least one unit of Warriors, and either Termagants, or try to build out yourself up some Rippers just to kind of get a good base for troops. And troops are, excuse me, really important in this edition because they have the objective secured rule. What that means is if I'm holding an objective and my opponent say, we'll just do a quick little demonstration. So this is my Tyranid, this is the objective, this is the opponent. So the opponent's holding it, but say he's not a troops choice, he's an elite. My troops choice here takes priority over it and steals the objective. So he's controlling it and he can't actually deny unless he's another troops choice, in which they just cancel each other out. So troops are important, especially for Maelstrom, because you really want to get objectives, and that's the name of the game with it, is just scoring as many objectives as you can rather than just trying to kill the opponent and hold on to one or two lone objectives. So you got to kind of keep that in mind. So that's why Deep Striking Rippers work well, because they can come up and steal things, and Warriors are always good because they have Synapse, obviously. So those are the considerations when looking at the troops section. So again, my recommendations is build up a little Ripper Swarm and Warriors just to get started with them. Termagants, you can never go wrong with them. It's good to just actually have models in case you're running a Tervagon. But that's a troops section for the most part. So moving on to fast attack. So the fast attack section, I've actually built up a few more models since the last time you've seen them. I now have been running Raveners a bit, and I've actually had a bit of success with them. I find with Raveners, if you're going to go with them, you need at least 6 of them, and Rending Claws are an absolute must. Death Spitters are kind of up in the air. A lot of people say go for them, some say don't. I like them because they can kind of pop transports at the deep strike, pop up and get rear armor for the most part. They'll glance most things to death. And then they can charge in the next turn. So Raveners actually work really well. They're the same cost as Shrikes. I don't have the Shrikes done yet. I have no play experience with Shrikes. I guess Shrikes can get a bit more expensive as you stick, say, flesh hooks and more things like that onto them. But for the most part, people say Shrikes are better because they have Synapse. The save between these guys is the same. They move the same distance, but I don't have Shrikes built yet. But I have been running the Raveners really recently. I have really been enjoying them. So if you're a new player, don't rule Raveners out. They can work, but you need at least 6 of them in my opinion. 3 is just not enough to get across the table and do damage, but at least with 6, they can do pretty well. And in combination with the Venom Throat too, I know it's hard to keep them near them because they move 12 inches, but if you can somehow pull it off, keeping them in cover, because they're beasts and they just move right through cover like it's nothing, you can really improve their survivability. So don't rule out Raveners when building a list, but if you are going to take Raveners, you do kind of have to build them around your list. Like, they work well with Flyrants, Carnifexes, anything else that can really pose a huge threat on the table that's going to take the pressure away from them, or even if Raveners do look really threatening, they're going to take the pressure off your Hive Tyrants. Because remember with Tyranids, the name of the game is target priority. You want to confuse your opponent and give them too many options and kind of overwhelm them, because that's the idea with Tyranids. So moving on to other choices in fast attack, you have Spore Mines. I have never actually really run just a dedicated Spore Mine fast attack choice. Some people use them just kind of as lane blockers, just as general annoyances. They're cheap, and I guess you could do it. I don't have much experience with them, so I'm not really going to say an overly lot about them. You kind of have to play with them yourself and see if they fit into your list or if they work or not for you. I would rather save the points and spend them, say, on Gargoyles or other things. Gargoyles are almost a must include in a lot of my list, reason being because they're fast. In combinations with Venom Throats is where they shine, because they stay. I always deploy them in front of my army. They're essentially just a shield to just die off, or if some of them live, just harass the opponent or maybe grab a far objective, because eventually far into the game your opponent won't worry about them quite as much. So they're good for that. You can put Adrenal Glands or Toxin Sacs on them too and make them a little bit more threatening, but I kind of stay away from that and just kind of keep them as cheap shield blockers, because with Venom Throats they give pretty much your whole army a 3-up save with Shrouded and Intervening models, and just due to their size and how they're kind of up like that, they'll generally cover most models pretty well. So that's the role for Gargoyles. I recommend at least 15. 10 is just not enough to keep a nice shield wall up, and 15 is kind of where the sweet spot is. 20 is a lot better, but I mean, if you're tight on points, excuse me, cutting down to a 15 is not a bad option. Then we have the old Hive Crone. Hive Crone is he's a really good unit to take. Again, flying monsters creatures with the rule changes to the grounding test. This guy just got a lot better. The one downside to him is Vector Strike changed, so it's no longer just D3 hits, or was it? No, it was D3 plus 1 hits. Yeah, it's been so long I can't remember. It was D3 plus 1, we'll say. I'm pretty sure it was. Someone will correct me, but he lost that ability unless he's actually Vector Striking another flyer. So that kind of took a hit on him. He's still got his uses. I use him as an anti-infantry role and also a bit of anti-air role / vehicle with the haywire tentacles that he has. So he definitely still has his place in a lot of lists. I wouldn't rate him as terrible with the Vector Strike changes, but he's definitely got his place. I use him in a lot of my lists, and each time he has good success. Like, he'll take out a unit or two, or just harass the opponent enough that he takes the pressure off the rest of my army. So that's fast attack covered. If you have any questions about them again, just toss in the comment section. I'm going to actually do a dedicated Tactica video to Raveners and how to run them, just how to make them work on the table, because I mean, these guys just are by far one of my favorite models in the Tyranid codex. They just look great, they're really fun to use, and I've been wanting to use them forever in my list. So it wasn't until a while ago on the Tyranid Hive someone actually made a thread dedicated to Raveners, and actually a lot of unwanted units, and it gave me the inspiration just to use them. So I got a few more, and I've actually been running them with a bit of success. You can see our other battle reports if you want to see them in action. And Shrikes will be another one too I'll use, because I'm really eager to try out some variety in my list. I got 9 Shrikes on the go, so you'll see them soon. Now we're moving over to my heavy support options. So with them, you got the Carnifex, Trigon / Moloch. I proxy him as a Moloch because I don't have an actual Moloch model made yet. Biovores, Tyrannofex, and the Exocrine. So a lot of good options. This is probably our most hotly contested slot for workable options. First we'll talk about the Carnifex. Carnifexes are great. You honestly can't go wrong with them. The key to them is bringing them in at least broods of 2 or multiple broods of 1. I found works good, just because it kind of forces your opponent to choose at different targets, so you can kind of mess with them there, but you kind of got to be careful doing that. They're best equipped with the Twin Link Devours. Anything they look at in a brood of 3, we'll say, with Twin Link Devours is probably going to evaporate. That's 36 shots, Twin Link, Strength 6, so it's a lot of heat coming at them. So Carnifexes, and I mean, they're Strength 9 on the charts, D3 Hammer Wrath. These guys are just monstrous with any vehicles or anything they get to in close combat. And if you are going to roll them as a dedicated close combat version, you can do that as well. Just make sure you use adrenal glands on them. As I learned in one of my VAT reps, I didn't put adrenal glands on, and they didn't have fleet, and they failed the charge by 1 inch. It was like a 4-inch charge or something. It was pretty upsetting. That cost me the game too. So if you are going to run them as close combat, make sure you kit them out appropriately. Toxin sacks are just a waste of time in my opinion. They're Strength 9 already, so the rerolls I guess would be nice, but points could be better spent on adrenal glands. Now I'm talking about the Trigon. This guy, he's one of my favorite models, but he's just so hard to use on the table now. His role just can be done better by so many other units. The Moloch, on the other hand, still has his place in the list. He's definitely great for popping up and clearing up blobs of infantry. He is risky though, because if he scatters or doesn't come in, he kind of got a lot of points just sitting off the table, but he's definitely a one-trick pony. When he works, he works. The thing with Molochs, if you're going to bring them, the best option to do is bring at least 2 of them, have a bit of redundancy, and also kind of forces the opponent to be careful about where he moves stuff, and having a couple of them can really threaten the opponent on the table. So Molochs are best brought in groups, in my opinion. Biovores, probably my favorite heavy support choice. Between that and the Tyrannofex is probably my favorite. Biovores are best run in at least broods of 2. 3 is amazing because, I mean, strength 4, AP 4 templates coming at you is pretty wild with a 48-inch range. These guys, for the most part, any infantry unit they'll actually hit when they're in Brood of 3, they'll just decimate. So if you need to think about anti-infantry option, don't ever leave out the Biobor. They are amazing for that, and they're pretty cheap, and they actually got 3 wounds and 4 up save. Like, they're actually really good for the point cost. Probably the best point per performance, we'll say, in our codex, in my opinion. You get your best bang for the buck with these guys, I think. I mean, if you're playing against infantry list, that is. If you're playing against an armored list, obviously, they won't be quite as good. Next is Tyranid. This guy is one of my favorite to use just because he's such a beat stick. He's got a 2-up save. I usually bring electroshock grubs on him. If you're looking for just a unit that can just gain line breaker easily or just fly up the table, he's also good too. I usually turn him sideways and just kind of have, like, say a venom throat behind him just to kind of shield them and move up the table like that. He's great for clearing infantry, and with electroshock grubs he's a threat to vehicles as well. With his 2-up save, he's pretty decent on the table, and for the most part your opponent will target, say, the gargoyles or a flyer at first. So this guy can definitely pump out his damage before he gets taken out. And it's not too often, actually, I find my Tyranid get killed. Like, they are rather really durable, and for the most part they just kind of survive to the end of the game. So Tyranid are definitely a good option to consider, and only ever take the acid spray on them. I'll say that right now. Rupture Cannon and the what's it called? Flesh Borer Hive are just absolute trash. The Flesh Borer Hive is essentially just 20 Termagants shooting, when you could take 20 Termagants for cheaper than that, and also really, in reality, have more wounds, though you won't have a 2-up save, obviously. But so that's the Tyranid. Last guy to talk about is the Exocron. He is our other AP2 option in the Tyranid Codex. He's great for taking out elite infantry as well as sort of vehicles, mostly light armored vehicles, just due to the fact he's only strength 7. So he's not that consistent at taking out heavier vehicles such as Wave Serpents, unless he's getting the side or rear armor. Just with their jank, it's not likely that'll blow them up. But he's a good option to consider. He's fairly well costed for his points. For my opinion, though, I'd rather take a Tyranid. The times I have taken an Exocrine, he has worked. There's been a few times where I take him and he hasn't done an overly lot, but he's a good option to consider. Looking at heavy support, new players, what I'd recommend is getting a hold of at least 2 Biobors. It's a bit expensive, I know, because they're only fine cast and they're $50, I think, per model. Either I'm getting a couple of these guys, a couple of Carnifexes, or at least 1 Tyranid to get you going. So that's it really for list building basics. So I kind of highlighted almost all the units in the Tyranid Codex. I know I left out a couple, like Death Leaper and the Lictors, just because I don't have them at Strikes. Those are really the only models I'm missing. But I do have Strikes in the work. Death Leaper I also have on my painting table. And I also have Gene Stealers and a Broodlord. I guess I didn't talk about a Broodlord. They kind of just fall under Gene Stealers. They're just kind of super duper Gene Stealer. But anyway, that's the list building basics for 7th edition and some things you need to consider when making a list. If you have any comments or anything you want to add to the video, or any questions if you're a new player, don't hesitate to ask. I'm sure either I or another Tyranid player will answer them. And this goal of this video is just to help newer players kind of get an idea of what to think about when actually making a list. So, hope you enjoyed this. Tyranid Tactica Raveners will be coming out soon, as well as building a 1750 point list Tactica video as well. So thanks for watching.